It's my pleasure to present my next guest. Yes, there are a lot of musicians, and musicians are, expected on my podcast. But as you know, I have people peripherally involved, and because I am a manager, I have in particular affinity to managers and managers' stories. In fact, as you know, I've said many times, I consider myself more a manager than a musician. So today's guest is a legend. He's a Supermensch legend, as a matter of fact. For those of you who have not seen the documentary produced by and directed, did he produce and direct both? I think.
Both.
Yeah, Mike Myers, a client of my guest, Mr. Shep Gordon. Welcome to the show.
Aloha, nice to see you.
You're not in Hawaii today, am I correct?
No, I am. Yeah, I'm actually traveling this weekend for the first time.
Is it 6 a.m.? Where? What?
It's
how?
9.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're
Good.
6 hours behind New York.
Oh, you're 6 hours. Oh, that's right. 3. So yes, you would be. So much for my math. My math was better when I was a drug dealer. Actually, I had a younger brain.
Yeah. We share that in common.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes that kind of person a manager. Do you know? Because Doc McGee.
Same skill sets.
Yeah, kind of, So, but I'll say this: the first thing I ever really truly did in the music business. I mean, I had a little band when I was 13 years old, and we tried out for the Cafe Wah down in the Village, and we didn't make it. But I got to be friends with. I don't know if Manny Roth was there at the time. This is 1966, but some friends of in my neighborhood had a band called the Glass Stairway, and they were really good, and I got them a booking to play at the Cafe. Well, that was my first management guy. So I was 14 years old, and I tell the owner, "You got to get this band, man. They're really great. They're really great." And they put in the Glass Stairway, who became a house band at the time that Jimi Hendrix was playing there, Jimmy James and the Blue Flames. And on the day that Chaz Chandler came down to see him was the day after the Animals played in Central Park, which was August 6th, 1966. I was at that show. It was my first rock show. The next day they went down, and my friend Freddie Rivera, who was the drummer, said that he saw them in the corner kind of talking. So it's a little bit of history. But now that we bring Hendrix in history, after watching Supermensch, your movie, my wife Sharon, who met you at the rock festival in Europe about 8 or 9 years ago, and you sat with her for 2 hours. And she said to me, "That's one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life." And I said, "That's Shep Gordon." She goes, "Yeah, man, what a great guy. We just sat around and talked for hours." And then she's watching the movie. She goes, "Oh my God, that's the guy I was talking to. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." She says that I'm Zelig because I always seem to be at the right place at the right time in certain circumstances. But you, I'm sorry, there's Zelig, and then there's Super Zelig. Take me to that time in Los Angeles when you walked into that hotel room and it was Jimmy Janis and Jim Morrison. I mean, I can't even imagine what that was like.
It really wasn't anything unusual because they weren't Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and Janis Joplin then. They were, struggling musicians who didn't have money for a car and hitchhiked around LA. So it really wasn't that. I mean, I knew who they were. People knew who they were, but it was a very different time. I mean, they were making very little money. My circumstance was I checked into a motel. It was, I think, $35 a night, and had an incident with Janis Joplin, who I didn't know was Janis Joplin. And when I got down to the pool, she was sitting with Jimi Hendrix. And we struck up a friendship. And one day Jimmy said, you Jewish? And I said, yeah. And he said, you should be a manager. And I said, great. And the Chambers brothers were there. And Jimmy said, don't you hold those freaks from Phoenix in your basement? And he said, yeah. And so that was Alice Cooper. So that was my first band, and that's how we got together.
Well, Jimmy wound up being managed by Michael Jeffries.
Yep.
Didn't he? Did you know Michael Jeffries?
No, I met him once or twice. I can't say I really knew him. I met a few guys after that. I met Albert Grossman, who became a real hero.
And for people who don't know, Albert Grossman basically was Dylan's manager and probably the grand poobah of the Woodstock scene, right?
I mean, he had everybody that was significant.
Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Yeah, Joan Baez, the band. And he was a remarkable Renaissance man. He had a studio in a called Bearsville, and you put a Chinese restaurant in there. This is back in the late 60s. Just a giant of a man. There were a few managers, but there's never there's no way to really train to be a manager, so there was no real tradition. There was a tradition of Jewish guys in the business end of the entertainment industry, the agencies, the record companies, the film studios. So that was sort of the walk I took down, rather than business school or music management school. I don't think anything like that still exists.
Did you ever play an instrument?
I played trombone in a high school marching band, very poorly.
And you said, maybe this is not my skill set.
Yeah, I do. This was definitely not my thing. And I'm not, music is not my sweet spot. So it wasn't out of passion. It really was a way to pay for lunch. Much more than a passionate dream of, oh, I'm going to be a great manager. I didn't even know what a manager was. I mean, the first time I was at a meeting trying to sign Pink Floyd, and they asked if I could get him a gig. And when they left the room, I had to ask Hendrix, what's a gig?
No. Did you actually say that?
Oh, yeah. No.
What is a gig?
What is a gig?
That's funny. So was that Syd Barrett's like last week as a band member?
He wasn't in the band anymore.
He was gone already.
He was gone already.
Yeah. Okay, because I had tickets to see Floyd at the Fillmore in 68 or 69, and they canceled because I understand that's when he freaked out.
Yeah, he freaked. That's how, so I think I ended up with him. Mine was in late 69 or 70. Wow. They had come to LA. A lot of the shows canceled because Syd Barrett wasn't in the group anymore. They didn't have money to get home. Hendrix or Lester Chambers or somebody brought him to my room about management. We met this great guy. He's got a group, Alice Cooper. Why don't you let him manage you in America, and he'll get you somehow home. So they came, and I said, what do you want me to do? I said, can you get us a gig? If you get us a gig that pays to get us home, you could be our U.S. representative. So they left the room, and I said, what is a gig? And Lester explained to me it was a job. And he said, I know a guy in Chicago, and he called a fellow named Aaron Russo, who had the Kinetic Playground in Chicago, which was like the Fillmore of Chicago. Every act went through. And he talked to him for a while. He put me on the phone with him, and we booked him this was like a Tuesday or Wednesday. We booked him for the following Saturday, and he was going to give him $5,000. So we went back over we called the guys, Lester called the guys, asked them to come back to our room. They came back to the room, and he said, Shep got you a gig. And I said, where? Kinetic Playground? You're kidding me. That's the greatest room. It's next Saturday. Next Saturday, wow. And what do we get? We've never made $5,000 in our life. You're our U.S. representative. We love you. You're fantastic. Turns out they get to Chicago, and the club burned down that weekend. Yeah. And they didn't get paid.
Yeah. Was it Italian Lightning, by the way?
It was Italian Lightning. And what I found out later on, because I became very friendly with Aaron, who ended up running for mayor of Vegas and married Bette Midler. Oh. What I found out from him later on was that he didn't say he lit the fire, but he said the place was decaying. I just had a bad feeling. I needed to book somebody in for that weekend, so it looked like I had a show going on, but I couldn't fuck over an agent who would give me other acts. So when you guys called, it was like, oh my God, this is a dream come true. Sure, I take $5,000. I knew I wasn't going to pay you. So
sounded great.
And I lost Pink Floyd.
Yeah,
that was my only booking.
But you were a hero for your first gig, yeah. Right? For temporarily. In my book, I talk about my drug dealing. I started when I was 15 years old, and I only did it because my parents had no money. I couldn't buy a guitar, so I bought I bought a nickel bag of marijuana, and someone said, well, you can buy an ounce for $15 and get 7 nickel bags out. And I went, wow, that math works for me. $15 turns into $35. Wow, that's kind of good. And then I bought 2 ounces. It turned into $70. And I bought a quarter pound for $90. And next thing you know, for the next 5 years, I'm dealing. And I'm like, a pretty big weed dealer in the New York area. Everybody knew me in Central Park. And then I went to Europe and I dealt in Amsterdam, and I funded my dreams with marijuana. But here's the thing. I was a street guy. Like, I liked people. And so in this particular case, it was a people business, for lack of a better way to describe it. And by the way, I do not champion any drug use whatsoever. As people know, the band became extremely anti-drug, and I became extremely anti-drug because I lost a lot of my friends back in the day, and it was horrible. But in the beginning, it was fun and crazy. And, of course, pot is now legal just about everywhere. So maybe I was ahead of my time, you were ahead of your time. But what is it about that kind of outlaw mentality that makes for a good manager, as far as?
Yeah, I don't know if it's outlaw mentality or it's survival instinct. I think, at least for me, dealing was like you, it was a way to buy lunch. I looked at it really simple terms. And then as I became better at it and expanded my client base, it started to provide me with things I wanted. It provided me with a car, it provided me with,
and drugs. I mean,
and I love smoking. Smoking was a really big part of my life. And then in the early days of Alice, we needed funding. And you have to get funding somewhere if you're going to go for it. And that was.
Let's talk about those early days with Alice. Okay. Mm-hmm. So Alice at that time was the band. Alice Cooper was the band. Correct. The five guys, right? It wasn't Alice solo, it was Alice's band. Right. So you came out as manager of the Alice Cooper group. Correct? They were signed to Zappa's label, Bizarre, at the time?
No, they about a week later, they signed to Zappa's label.
Okay. What was your memories of that relationship there? I mean, I did see the doc, of course, but, Zappa is such a giant in the business. And I could see his cynicism or his humor, I could see his intellectual curiosity. But what was it like dealing with him in the context of business with the band?
Didn't really deal with him at all, either creatively or in business. Business was Herbie Cohn, his partner, who was a very tough guy, really tough guy.
How old were you at this point, Shep?
I was maybe 20.
And you're thrown into the cesspool of the music industry with tough guys, colorful guys.
No, tough guys. My first meeting with Herbie Cohn, I showed up as Alice's manager when he thought he was going to be signing a record deal and a management contract with him and a publishing deal. He had shook hands with him. And the meeting ended with him with a chair chasing me around the office. And he was a tough guy. And the GTOs, I don't know if you know the GTOs.
Yeah, sure. Girls Together outrageously. Yes,
getting between me and him and scurrying me out of the place. Because they lived at the Landmark, so they knew me from before. Okay. They heard the screaming in the office, and they broke it. They came into the office and got between us, or the guy would have probably killed me.
Did you think at that time maybe this wasn't the gig for you? It freaked you out a little bit?
It scared me and it angered me, but I didn't really have much of a choice. It was really about survival. So I knew I was either going to make a career at something, or I was going to keep dealing and end up in jail. And I didn't want to end up in jail.
I had similar concerns in my life. I was either going to be dead from drug overdose, or be in the wrong place at the wrong time and murdered in a drug deal, or have a police record. And I had to get out. And yes, I was a guitar player. I mean, back in those days, Toby and I were in school together at that time. And we fought the same, anti-war battles. And Toby's brother, Joshua, and I sued the Board of Education together for various things. But at the same time, we're involved in the same lawsuit. Shows you how a small world. And we're talking about Toby Mamus, who's been working with you for, I don't know, how many years now has Toby been with you?
25, 30 maybe.
Yeah, long time. So we were a product of the times. And when I was 20, I decided to stop everything and just get off that train before it killed me. And the band started. So I was 72. At this point, Cooper is super big because School's Out was what, 70 or 71? What summer was that?
Yeah, maybe 72, 71, 72. Yeah.
Massive.
Yeah.
absolutely massive. And I remember running into,
Biggest tour in the world in 1972.
okay, I remember running into some guy in my neighborhood who I was like dealing to, and he says, "Oh yeah, I work for the Alice Cooper Group." And I said, "What's your name?" He goes, "Peter Glick."
Mm.
Name sounded all familiar to you?
No.
No, he never
Possible.
took me to see the band. He always said, "Well, they're down at Electric Lady, or they're rehearsing downtown," and you know, like maybe he thought I was going to give him a discount because all he kept talking about was Alice Cooper, Alice Cooper. And he wore this American flag leather fringed jacket, and he was balding with a ponytail in the back.
That's familiar to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
a balding, long hair tied in a ponytail, and this wacky American
The
flag.
jacket's very familiar to me.
Yeah, with fringes on it.
Yeah.
That was his uniform. I
Yeah,
remember talking to him about it and thinking, wow, this guy knows Alice Cooper. This guy knows Alice Cooper. This is like a big deal. So Alice explodes. And when Twisted started, the bands that we copied in the earliest days were Bowie, Reed, Mott, and Alice, because we all loved Alice. So at what point now we're talking 73, right? At what point did it look to you like the band was just not going to be able to continue?
Never looked like that at all to me. It was sort of a the journey was needs some background for it. So the band, there's nobody named Alice Cooper in the band, and we meet with a publicist named Pat Kingsley, and she asked the band after the meeting to stay outside. Would I stay in with her? And she says, "Listen, I know how to make one person named Alice Cooper famous. I don't know how to make 5 people named Alice Cooper famous. Pick out the strongest guy in there who does the best interviews, who's willing to work 14 hours a day, and I can make Alice Cooper a star, but I can't make a group called Alice Cooper a star. There are other people maybe who can, but I know what I can do." And she was the best PR person ever. Like, so I went back in the lobby of the building and I told them what she said. And they said, "Do you agree?" And I said, "It makes sense to me. I don't know enough to give you a definitive answer, but it certainly makes sense." They voted for Alice. So I went back in, I said, "We got one." And Vince became Alice, and we changed his name legally so the cover was all there. And at the time, I was very vocal with all of them, saying, you know, once you give him the name, he's Alice Cooper. And Alice, you're going to be able to fuck these guys whenever you want. And I don't want that to happen. So let's all make a deal. Until we're millionaires, everything goes into the pot. And once we're all millionaires, we can sit down again and have a conversation. Where are we headed? And when the tour ended, and I think we all, maybe I worked them too hard, maybe they all chose to work too hard, but I think we had done 2 or 3 albums that year and probably 120 dates. They were really tired, but they were also very frustrated creatively, particularly Michael Bruce and Neil were very frustrated creatively. Every show there was conversation about, let's just play in our dungarees tonight and have people appreciate our music. Nobody appreciates our music. They like the hanging, they like the this, they're there for the toothbrush. Let's not wear the makeup. Let's not do this stuff tonight. And it would be a fight. I would have to fight. Alice would fight. It would be but I understood the creative. You know, now we had created this monster, Alice Cooper, and he was doing interviews 10 hours a day while they were at the pool sipping drinks. They felt like they were completely left out of this fame, that it was all going to him. And we ended up in a meeting. It was actually the first group meeting that the band had ever called. And we had a group meeting in Connecticut, and Michael announced that he was going to do a solo album next. And I think Neil announced the same thing. And I said, "Listen, guys, I just want you got to really understand this, that once you let Alice out of the chicken coop, I'm going with him, and we may never come back." Um, you got to know that we're willing to stay. Let's do this. We're number one in the world. Let's continue this. But if you really want to separate and do solo projects, he's going to do his own, and I'm going to do it with them. And where that leads, all bets are off. And we all have the same story. It's not as if I'm telling you a story that Dennis won't tell you or Neil won't tell you. I think we each bring to it our own. They didn't hear as much about it. It'll never come back together, or it may not come back together. But the set of circumstances is what happened, and that's what happens in life. You make decisions and you pay for the decision. I spent 3 days last week on the phone with Mike Bruce. We're all really friendly. On our side, obviously no hard feelings. I think on theirs, maybe some disappointment, but no, I don't believe any hard feelings. We all celebrate holidays together and get together. And I think the next project for Alice might be a group album. So,
there's a quote from Paul Simon, it's a line in the song, The Boxer. And that line rings more emphatically to me every day that I thought about it. And I write a column for a magazine, and I kind of quoted this, and what the line was is, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest.
mm-hmm.
And you are so right.
Yeah.
You do hear what you want to hear.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I mean, we're all the same way.
Yeah. So was that a profound turning point in your evolution as a manager, or
no, not at all.
Okay.
I mean, it was a critical point, because what Alice and I always wanted to do, we were able to do, which was a Broadway play in rock and roll. But that meant creating a new art form, which is expensive, and risking every penny we had. Every dime Alice and I had went into Welcome to My Nightmare.
So at that period in '72, Allman Brothers was also huge, and they did a really big tour. And I remember reading an interview with Phil Walden, and years later, I asked Phil, because drugs is what destroyed that. There's always a reason why things destroy bands, and the story was that the tour grossed $12 million, and by the time the accounting was all done, they only had $125,000 to split amongst all the guys in the band. They're all sitting around a table going, "How come we only got $125,000?" Phil Walden said, "You do understand, don't you, that your cocaine bill was X millions of dollars, because you do understand that you didn't like each other to the point where not only did you stay in separate hotels, but you rented out separate whole floors to keep other band members out of your floor, that you had security guards at the elevator to make sure that another band member couldn't take an elevator up to the floor of the hotel that you completely booked out to prevent other band members." I'm reading this, and this is in the early days of Twisted. I'm going, is this where the fucking thing goes? Is this the mania that it goes to? And yet, and so I asked him, I said, "Was that bullshit?" He goes, "No, it wasn't bullshit." He goes, "They broke up they broke up after the Brothers and Sisters tour, and they got back years later, and luckily they were able to get back and salvage a career. But that's the excesses are what destroyed it. But it's nice to know in the case of Alice, well, it's not nice to know that they broke up for any reason, but at least that wasn't the catalyst in this.
No, not at all. Case. Yeah, not at all. And never one moment of bad blood, or not a moment of anything. I mean, it really was, it's a pretty remarkable story.
And any shows they didn't make, they were actually really sick, and no one was like ODing or passed out in a hotel room or anything like that.
Drugs were not a problem for the band. Alice's drinking was a problem, but he only missed one show. Nobody else had any. Glenn loved to drink, but never affected him. Hard drugs never really hit us. I was really the only person dealing with hard drugs. Yeah. Nobody in the group.
Who was the next act after Alice?
Next act for me after Alice is Anne Murray.
What a crazy, when you discussed Anne Murray and what kind of left field that was, and getting her on, Midnight
Special.
Midnight Special. I mean, what brought you to her? Did you just love her as an artist, or?
Oh no, nobody knew who she was. No, I did just, it was random. I was doing an event in Canada with John Lennon.
Oh, that was the Live Peace in Toronto
Right.
festival where
Yeah.
Yoko played in the bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and where Alice did the chicken.
Yes. Alice did the chicken and Yoko performed them. Correct.
And I ran into a group of producers, a guy named David Briggs, who produced Neil Young, a guy named Brian Ahern, who had produced maybe Emmylou Harris or someone. And I was looking for producers, so I started talking to them. And they told me that I should meet this girl, since I was a manager, who was a gym teacher in Canada at the time, but was just went on a summer replacement Canadian variety show and had a song called Snowbird that it went #1 and now was trying to put together a career. And when I saw who it was, I said, you know, this is as far from Alice as I could possibly ever go. Let me see if I'm actually good at this thing or if I just got lucky. And so that was really why I took it on, to see would you know, could I apply what I thought helped Alice become famous to her career.
Well, there is a mindset amongst all entrepreneurs about the ability to be able to spin this and be able to consistently create and to reinvent who you are and to be challenged all the time.
Yeah.
And your career certainly exemplifies
definitely some challenges.
That. I mean, because you know, over and over and over and over and over again, you said, hey, let's try, oh, this hasn't been done before, and that's a risk, and maybe I'll lose it all. Or so my brother, who was a school teacher, he's a retired school teacher, and we're having this conversation one day about the differences between me and my brother. And my brother goes, you know, he goes, I wanted a career that I could depend on, and it was nice and smooth. And I was a teacher for 30 years and a pension, and a private school teacher and a pension. And my life just like went this. But you're a high school dropout, you're a drug dealer, then you're in a band, then you're starving, then you're making a lot of money, and then Twisted Sister gets a record deal, and then there's huge, and it breaks up, and then you become a stereo salesman, you go through a divorce, and then you find this band called Seven Dust, and they become successful, then they fire you, and then your wife leaves you, your second wife leaves you, and you lose everything, and then out of nowhere, the band Twisted Sister comes back, and it's just huge, and he goes, how the fuck do you live your life like that? Like, he goes, it's this. And I looked at him, and I went, you know, Jeff, I said, I was born with asbestos underwear. I can take the heat. There's something about people who either can and can't. Not everybody can do this kind of stuff. Uh-huh. What got me about your doc was, like, I would have called it smiling through the abyss. You just have this enormous capacity to find the absurdity through everything and laugh through it. Am I wrong about that? You know, yeah, like, do you look at yourself this way? How do you? Yeah,
I don't take it serious. I mean, you know, I don't take it seriously. Nothing I do matters. So it's, you know, it's not like I'm dealing with health of people's health, or, you know, I'm involved with the penal system, or where my stuff is making people famous in innocent, stupid ways, but that have some, that, how would I mean, what I try and do is take topics that don't really change people's minds about things that are important. I don't get involved in politics. I don't, but put a picture frame. What gets me off is taking something, putting a picture frame around it that keeps the art intrinsically what it is, and breaking it through the clouds, rather than having to compromise too greatly to break through the clouds. So, you know, things like For Women Only with Teddy Pendergrass. You know, how do I tell people that this is the sexiest guy in the world? Does it matter if I do or I don't? No. So I can deal with it with a sense of humor. Nothing's going to change on the planet if Teddy's a star or not a star. So how do I tell?
But Shep, but come on. I mean, nobody wants to also father a failure either.
Oh no, but failure is part of success. What I mean?
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
So in other words, that you took the risks and you went, okay, you know what? All things being equal, it's worth the risk. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I'm not going to let it kill me. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I'm going to give it
But
the
you
best
make it
shot I
happen
can.
in some way, shape, or form. You make it happen. Well, even if it fails, you can get something out of that failure as long as you look at it right. I've had so many failures, but you turn them around. If you're taking it all serious, and something failed, I had a perfect incident with Alice in the Cannon. I mean, I've had 100 of these, but I think I tell the story partially in the movie. But it's his first stadium show. Alice Cooper doing a stadium show has to do something different than the baseball team that plays there. What are we going to do? Shit, I'll shoot him across the stadium in a cannon. The old circus trick. Be fantastic. Come to the stadium, watch Alice get shot across the stadium. So we tried to rehearse it, and it was a complete failure. Like the dummy came out 2 feet and dropped. We had a 40-foot, 2-ton cannon. What are you going to do? We're like 3 days away from it. As a manager, I made a horrible mistake and advertised, see him get shot out of a cannon. So the second day we turned it into a huge penis. And I figured at least we'll make up some story. That was a failure. So now I have failed. I've completely failed. I mean, there's no way he's going to get shot out of a cannon at Three Rivers Stadium. So do I accept the failure? No. I say to Alice, I think you're going to spend tonight in the hospital. I just have a feeling the cannon's going to blow up tonight, the night before Pittsburgh. And we faked the blow up. And he went bandaged up. One of the guys did the show in a wheelchair. And the city embraced him. What artist would ever come from a hospital room to do a show at Three Rivers Stadium?
Nothing like pro wrestling mentality.
Yeah, exactly. It's pro wrestling mentality. But you can't do that with healthcare. But when you're doing what I do for a living,
which is entertainment.
So which is entertainment. I can, and as long as the artists I worked with sort of understood that, I never signed contracts. First thing I would tell them is, we got to think, I go to the edge. You're with me because I'm going to take you to the edge. You don't always have a safe landing. You got to be you got to understand that if you want me to take you to the edge, once in a while it doesn't work, we'll work our way through it. But if you're the kind of an artist who can maneuver fast, who can't laugh at yourself, it's not going to work with me because I'm out there. I mean, the kind of things I come up with are pretty out there.
So how many times did an artist go, no, I'll pass on you? Like, I mean, it didn't happen all the time, right? So
no, it only happened a couple of times. Van Halen. Okay. Sammy tells a story in his book. I used to tell artists, I won't make you the most money because that's not what really gets me off. I'm definitely going to fail a few times. If I do my job perfectly, I will probably kill you.
Yeah, I love that line.
This is what you get. So you don't need to sign a contract, so you can leave at any time. Or if you don't pay me my commission, I know you've left. You don't even have to send me a letter.
So Irving Azoff's line about management, which I'm sure you've heard, is the thing he hates most about management is he has to give the artist 80% of what he makes, which is pretty funny line. Funny line.
I hadn't heard that. That's a great line.
Bill Kerbishley, you know Bill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what's Bill's line is, being a manager is doing the unnecessary for the unappreciative, which I like. And my line is, managing an artist is like putting a saddle on an atomic bomb and holding on for as long as possible before the motherfucker explodes. And my tolerance is high, but because I'm this half musician, half manager guy, you kind of, it's tough because very few people have both skill sets. Right. It's really tough. And I look at myself,
a level of respect also, which is nice from artists.
But I kind of look at myself as a manager who plays guitar. At some point or another, I looked at my guitar playing. When I play good enough for rock and roll, I play good enough to get a record deal, I play good enough to do this. Now I want to look at contracts. I want to understand how the business is going. So I started doing that when the band was in the bars, and playing in the bars back in the 70s, we played for Wise Guys. Let's be honest about this.
Absolutely.
Okay? These were not members of, these were not Hadassah meetings. These were tough guys. And did you know Phil Basile?
Oh yeah.
Really well. So Uncle Phil.
Island Park.
So okay, Island Park speaks Action House back in Alice's day. It was the Action House, I believe, right?
I lived in Oceanside.
You lived in Oceanside. Well, hell, God, yeah. Nathan's in Oceanside. My God, come on. Yeah. So Philly was tough. Larry Tortorisi, his partner, was tough. Uncle Ralph Greco. I mean, the guy. It sounded like a Goodfellas review. Fat Scotty, Uncle this, Jimmy the Share, Freddie the Shoe, Billy the Knife, kind of guys. And we borrowed money consistently to do demos. And my agent, my agent's father was a consigliere for the mob. So he explained to me once, he says, if you do a deal with these guys and you make an arrangement, make sure there's other people on the telephone who can corroborate it. So that as long as you do what you're supposed to do, no one's going to fuck with you. So I always had like 3 people on the phone. I'd say, I need $4,000. And they go, well, you're going to guarantee you're going to play this date on such a date? And I'd say, yes. And we always play the date. No problem. Never had any issues. I mean, I borrowed money fairly consistently from some of these guys, and never, ever, ever, ever an issue, except one day, and nothing having to do with the club. I was threatened by a recording studio owner who said that somehow a deal that I made that I did not know I made, I owed him like $25,000. And he did threaten to break my kneecaps. He actually threatened to. Did you ever have anyone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you did. So, okay. So before I tell you how that was ameliorated on my end, tell me about that kind of a thing and how you dealt with that kind of stuff. If you can, I mean.
I didn't have to deal with it a lot. In those days, I'll leave the names out of all these people, but there was albums were what sold, and there was a thing called clean albums, and those were albums that didn't have punched holes in them. In every artist record deal, you had a 15% free goods clause. So the record company, for every 100 records they sold, they could give away 15 records without paying royalties, but they had to punch them. So if a record wasn't punched, it was called a clean record. And it was fairly common practice for managers to get pressure on them from different elements of different gangs and mobs to deliver clean records as a payoff for them to not break down your trucks or not give you personal harm or to not get robbed. I got robbed at my townhouse in New York 4 times. And 500 clean records. I never got robbed again. So that was sort of part of life. So I had to deal with it. I have a couple of times life threatened where I had to have security. But for me, it was always about clean records.
Okay. Ever deal with Morris Levy?
It's always about clean records.
Okay. Charles Cobman told me once. I asked Charles about Morris Levy because of roulette.
Always about clean records.
And I just
get strawberries.
Yeah. So, but I will tell you what Charles told me, because I guess he didn't care that the story gets told. I just said to him, back in the Kama Sutra roulette days, that was right in the midst of all that crap. I said, what kind of stories can you tell me about Morris Levy? He said, well, the only thing I will tell you is that one day Morris told me that one of his guys told him that there was a warehouse in Brooklyn that was manufacturing bootlegs off of Kama Sutra and roulette. And I said, what happened? He said, Morris said, there is no warehouse anymore. He goes, and there's no trucks with that warehouse anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So, and look, and those guys were tough guys. I mean, I look at Ahmet Ertegun. I just read the book by Dorothy Carvello, in which that expose on Atlantic Records and Ahmet. And, you know, these guys are interesting characters because on one side, they're refined international businessmen who hang around with Henry Kissinger and, you know, can do that. On the other side, they're like, you know, they're the criminal.
Well,
the
they had to
thug
live in
element.
that world. Yeah. You wanted records played and you wanted to be successful. You
You
had to live.
straddled that. You had to straddle that world.
Oh, yeah.
And you had to straddle it because you're a manager. So how do you not? You're dealing with promoters and all sorts of shit going on, right?
That's probably where the dealing experience came in good.
I talked my way in and out of many issues. And I think I did it because I had the street smarts to be able to do it. The guy that said he was going to break my kneecaps, we made a phone call to a guy who made a phone call to a guy who, you know, we knew could deal with this and kind of knew him. And the arrangement was made copaesthetically, if you understand.
Although it was real stuff. It's not just in the movies. I remember I got a phone call on a private phone that nobody had the phone number to. It was literally a red phone in my apartment. It was Bob Ezrin's apartment, which I had leased for 2 years. So I didn't even know the number to that phone. And I went back when Teddy had his accident in Philadelphia so I could go down every week. And there was a guy telling me, hey, this Shep Gordon, I go, yeah, meet me at the corner of 8 a.m. tomorrow. And I didn't meet him. He called the next day and said, hey, you better meet me at that corner. You're going to not live to regret it. You got me, you know? So I called Howard Stein, the promoter at the time, and he had these off-duty policemen who did his security. I hired 2 of them to be with me 24 hours. And a couple of days later, I get a phone call from a guy who will be unnamed. And he said, Shep, it's yeah. He said, you are one lucky guy. So I said, why's that? And he said, I do this breakfast meeting every Tuesday morning with the guys. We've been doing it for 20 years. And this morning, one of the guys, he says to me, I got to leave early. I got to go bump off this guy. And I says to him, who you bumping off? He said, this guy, Shep Gordon. So I says to him, you can't bump him off. He's with me. So Shep, I need you to meet me. And he tells me where to meet him. So I said, Tommy, I'm not with you. I'm not with him. I ain't with anybody. Oh, excuse me. I said the name, which I shouldn't. Yeah, no, but it was part of the fabric. It's what you dealt with. The hardest one for me was actually the reaction of the Chitlin Circuit and the Black Promoters Association in that world when I placed Teddy with promoters who actually paid him.
Yeah, which you go into great depth as to the politics of that, which is pretty scary. Which I did not know. I didn't know that how that kind of play for pay. I mean, no one got paid. You did the gig and we played your record, and that's really it. So Gene Cornish from the Young Rascals told me that when the Young Rascals played the Murray the K Easter show in 1967, Murray called Sid Bernstein, who was their manager at the time, or Sid told me, he says, yeah, I got these bands, the Who and Cream, and nobody knows who they are, and I can't sell tickets. I got Mitch Ryder and Wilson Pickett, and I'm dying, and I need the Young Rascals to headline. And they had the #1 record in the country at the time, which was Groovin'. And of course, it'd be an instant sellout. Right. And he said, and Sid said, how much can you pay him? He said, I got no money in the budget. He goes, but I'll buy him lunch every day. And they did it for lunch. Now, he was a very powerful DJ.
Oh, right? It was the whole game.
The whole game. So you kind of did it for those guys. Did you ever have an artist who you fired because, and you don't have to name them, but because of, whatever drug issues, or they didn't pay attention to you? And like, what's the point of having me as a manager if you don't pay attention?
I had 1 or 2 artists in my career where I thought I had done as much as I could do for them and that someone else could do a better job. But never really drug related, or I just thought I had shot every bullet in my gun and I just didn't have any more to shoot.
Wow. And so you kind of confidently go, hey man, I've done the best I can do, but it looks like it's go somewhere else.
Yeah. Just, the couple of guys that I got to certain places where somebody who was really good at milking the money could have done a better job than me milking it.
Is that because there's lines that you don't cross? the certain
No,
things you
no,
won't
because
do?
it's not, never was my real concern.
Okay.
So I didn't spend my time, really figuring out. I never was, I always made guys get business managers. I was never good at that part. But what I enjoyed doing was I enjoyed coming up with ideas that everyone said couldn't work and having that moment when it worked, look in the mirror at myself and go, you pulled it off, motherfucker. Like when I came up with for women only concerts, the record company wanted to drop Teddy. They thought they were going to get civil rights lawsuits. Promoters didn't want to do the shows. His lawyer resigned because of the lawsuits he thought he was going to get.
What years was that now?
That was maybe 80.
And back in those days, happy hours, ladies drink free. There wasn't an issue about discrimination, right? In those days, in terms
It
of
wasn't, but we said we'd only sell tickets to women, and there was all sorts of civil rights issues, and you can't exclude men. You can't. That's not legal. It's that the record company felt that they were going to get a huge backlash of people returning Teddy records.
Right.
Fuck you. You don't want us at our concert. Fuck you. And they said, that's in Teddy's case, 30% of the buyers were men.
And you had no problem at the end of the day.
Oh, at the end of the day, it made his career. I think
Yeah.
It was gigantic.
Yeah. So it was a risk.
Yeah.
Everybody took it, and it turned out the concerns of the risk were unfounded, pretty much.
Well, I don't know if they were unfounded, but we pulled it off. There probably were some guys pissed off. We had so many pimps out in front of Radio City Music Hall. Oh my God. I can't imagine how many guns were out there.
Your roster of artists is a beautiful roster. It's a rainbow.
Uh-huh.
It's all colors, all genres. So you love music, or you love the art of the artist, and you're not pigeonholed into metal or into this or into that. Obviously, the theatrics that Alice had as a theatrical performer, the only thing in common with all these other artists are that they were very good performers. So in their own way, they were theatrical, but in their own way.
Right. They each after Alice and Anne Murray, I realized that I was sort of unique as a manager, and that I would have the opportunity to have a lot of bands, and record companies started to send people to me, and I realized that the hardest thing is to make a connection with the audience. So I was only going to take artists who had weathered the storm and made a connection, which then allowed me to do what I like to do, which is figure out how to tell the world what that connection is in a really simple, unfiltered way. That's what For Women Only was with Teddy. He was all about sex. With Luther, he was about romance. So I did live weddings on every major station in America. They'd run a contest to get married on the air by Luther, which really pushed romance. Doing The Chicken with Alice really pushed rebellion. So that's what I tried to do with, so I never took an act after Anne Murray that didn't have a top 10 record. So I had the luxury of having an audience already.
The first year of Twisted, we had a manager who after hearing you describe what you did, it reminded me of a couple of things. Number one, we performed with a performing chimp one night.
Yeah.
In fact, we opened for the chimp.
Mm-hmm.
The chimp was the headliner.
Yeah.
And we were the opening act. And the chimp definitely blew us off the stage. It was Mr. Jiggs.
I remember Mr. Jiggs well.
Yeah. And so we performed at a club called Dodds in Orange, New Jersey. And Mr. Jiggs' whole shtick was he'd roll around the bar at Dodds with a cart and light women's cigarettes and mix them drinks. And we were, this was 73, so we were full transvestite back in those days. And I used to be chained to my lead singer, the original lead singer, we had dog collars on, and we would do our thing. And then Mr. Jiggs came on and got a way better response than we did. And I remember telling this to John Scher one day. like saying, well, the most humiliating thing for me was I played on a bill with Mr. Jiggs. He goes, we used to book Mr. Jiggs at the Capitol Theater in Passaic. And so you remember this chimpanzee,
Oh, I remember
Mr.
Mr.
Jiggs.
Oh, yeah.
That's so funny. I mean, and then one day our manager says, we have a lot of girls following us, because back then glitter, glam girls, they were like they're really into us, I guess. There were a lot of girls and like wanted to see guys in makeup. And he said, why don't we have a contest where a girl gets to pick a band member she can go to a hotel with that night? Because like we were a bunch of whores back in those days, right? Perfect. So it's perfect. So the club was packed, and I said to the guy, well, wait a minute, like, what happens if the girl who wins this contest and gets to pick the guys isn't like, good looking? How do we get out of it? Like, let's say she picks a band member and they go, I really don't want to go with this girl. And he goes, here's how we're going to word it. It's going to be, you're going to win a night gladly given to you by the band member of your choice. A night gladly given to you by the band member of your choice. Well, this night was a chess night. A giant plastic chess night was behind the stage. And if it was someone you didn't want to be with, you handed her the night. And as it was, the really hot girl won the contest, and all the 5 guys are standing on stage thinking, which one is she going to pick? And of course, the lead singer at the time, this guy Michael, was standing up there, and she picked the guitar player Billy, and it became like really consternation. It pissed him off. But you try all these crazy gimmicks. When you talked about the fact that the Canon thing failed, we did a big showcase for Lenny Pizzi from Epic Records, and it was a fucking disaster. And he demanded that the band put on a theatrical performance at the SIR studio. And we could have played 5 nights a week. He could have come out to any gig and seen packed rooms, but he insisted on seeing us on his lunch break. And we had a confetti cannon, I believe. And, at the end of the show, the confetti cannon, it's like remember how big the SIR studio was in Manhattan? It was really big. I mean, the stage was like Madison Square Garden, and it was made for bands to rehearse gigantic shows there. So Lenny Pizza comes in at lunch hour, sits on a chair, one chair. He comes in, sits in the middle of the room. We do the show, and he's not reacting. He's sitting in the chair, and then is this?
Let me just get my dog out.
Oh, the cannon goes off, and the confetti comes out, and it's just one ball. It didn't explode, and it just landed in front of him. Like,
yep.
Oops.
That's I learned early in Alice's career rehearsal. One of the first stunts I tried to pull off, our goal was to get parents to hate us. And one of the first shows we ever did was at a place called The Experience in LA. And we wore, Alice and the band wore see-through clear plastic clothes, no underwear. And I put them on stage and went to a phone booth and called the police to tell them there was a naked group, because we wanted to get arrested for indecent exposure. We thought that would really piss off everybody. And by the time the police came, the heat of their body had fogged up the plastic, and the police just left. So that was when you got to rehearse.
Talk about a flaccid attempt, no pun intended.
Yeah.
So, Shep, tell me the really poignant part, besides the operation and you realizing you were kind of alone, which kind of was sad, by the way. But the other poignant part of the doc was what you said to Teddy in your failed attempt to get him to perform 2 weeks before his accident. You remember, he just wouldn't perform, and you did your best. And I remember hearing your voice. I'm going to tell you, as a manager, I could hear you saying to him, Teddy, people have traveled. Families have paid babysitters. People have driven to this gig, and he wouldn't do it. I mean, how did that feel that night that he said no? It must have just been crushing.
Yeah, I wasn't there. So I was actually I talked to him on the phone.
Okay.
And tried to get him to do it.
And he wouldn't.
No, I found out later, actually, after the documentary. The promoter called me up to tell me he was sicker than I made him out to be.
Okay.
But
you said to him, this is not good karma.
Yeah, no, I tried to explain to him what karma was. And when he came home, he had 3 accidents. He totaled 3 cars. The injury was on the 3rd accident.
Wow.
So I don't know if one had anything to do with the other, but that was his last shot.
Yeah, that was particularly poignant.
Yeah,
And the way it was couched, look, maybe for dramatic effect in the doc or not, but still in all, karma's a bitch.
yeah,
And
Carmen.
and it was tough, and it was tragic.
Yeah,
But the
that's
Live
such a
Aid
great
thing
guy. I
was
was,
was
yeah,
was redemptive to a
you
degree.
know, really a tough moment for me because I know getting him as famous as he was part of the problem, and I felt, some guilt for that and felt bad I couldn't protect him from himself.
Talk to me, towards the end of the doc. You discuss your view of fame and about, is it really worth it? Just talk about that. Like what
Yeah,
you've seen.
I mean, I never judge it. I just try and talk about it honestly. I think it's everybody's personal decision. Um, but the world I live in, which is different than a lot of other fame worlds, people became famous by having more and more and more people applauding for them, telling them how great they are, whether it's on the stage, whether it's in a supermarket. As they got more and more and more famous, the accolades became bigger, more consistent. And I found that most entertainers striving for that, where that is an attraction that drives them, is because there's something missing somewhere in them. There's some hole somewhere that they need people to tell them how much they love them. And it doesn't matter how many stadiums you fill up, that's not going to fill up your hole. That's a false god. So I think you get to a place where you're doing, 10,000 people, 15,000 people a night. You still got the hole. You start relying on your crutches more, whether it's a drug, whether it's anger, whether it's greed, whether it's frustration, whether it's whatever your drug happens to be, you start leaning on it heavier and heavier until it sort of overtakes you and becomes the only motivating thing. I mean, I'm sure you've come across artists who are at the top of their game and are miserable and isolated and alone, and nothing's good. The steak's always too well done or too rare. The potatoes are too soft or too mashy.
It's never enough. It's
Yeah,
never enough.
all the things that don't matter.
Right.
Or I want to have, jelly beans that are only green.
Right.
Or it's just it takes on a life of its own, and it's hard to crawl out of that hole when you're in it.
What's the best advice you ever got? Any singular or bit of advice you ever got?
I would say I never got the advice, but I would say from my time being around His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who I was lucky enough to cook for a while, he never talked about it, but I could see with everything he looked at. It could be a magazine, it could be a human, it could be a cat, it could be a flower, it could be a meal, it could be a blade of grass, it could be a Chinese politician. Everything he looked at, I always got the feeling the first thing he saw was the miracle in it. That he could see the miracle in, a desk. He could see the miracle in the tree that made the wood. And I could see him get this kind of joy and deep understanding. And then he would act or talk or do whatever he did. So for me, whenever I get in a bit of a hole somewhere where I'm not being grateful every second for all my blessings, I try and think back to that. So if my car gets a flat tire and I start to get angry, in my brain I say, wow, what a miracle that I have a car. I'm like, how did this happen? Did I get from this? What a miracle this thing is. Let me get it fixed instead of this motherfucker.
And cooking for the Dalai Lama was the whole point. And look, people, if you get a chance to watch Supermensch, I got this on Prime Video or Netflix, I don't remember which one, but you should watch it. It's a fascinating documentary because it covers so many parts of your life, and the celebrity chef part of your life, and then cooking became very kind of a religious experience for you,
Yeah, that's my passion. Yeah.
or spiritual, very spiritual. You started living through cooking, and you loved cooking. You know, Shep, here's the irony about your statements about fame, is that you possess a magnetism that makes you famous. You do know that, obviously. So how do you kind of, how does that work in? Like, you must say to yourself, more than just, well, I'm a lucky guy. I mean, if you listen to the testimonials, unless you paid them very well for every one of them, people would genuinely love you.
Yeah.
The people that work with you and know you really cherish you for you.
For it, yeah.
And it's really important. And you know, so for someone who can be so philosophically blasé about your view of fame and how you negotiate your life with the people who do it, in essence, you are as famous in many ways in this industry as these people are.
Deal with what they have to deal with. I mean, I'm famous in a very small circle, and it's very different, and I'm very grateful. You know, for me, I've realized early on, my life is really about service. That's really what makes me happy.
So if you can turn the power that you have into service, that's the
what
greatest. That's the benefit of your accumulated celebrity.
Which is what I try and do every minute of my life. Management is a service business completely. Cooking is completely a service art form. Service for me makes me happy. It's very selfish. So that, and I think my friends feel it, which I'm really proud of, that it comes through.
Well, it does. It actually does. Everyone, the doc humanizes an awful lot of people, and you've touched an awful lot of lives. By the way, famous, not famous, doesn't seem to matter. You know, you just love making people feel better, which is really good. I'm really good. I really appreciate the time. I know that your time is precious.
Good to see you. Really good to see you.
And I really, really do appreciate it. I've only been to Hawaii once, and I loved it. I did love it, but what I did really enjoy as manager to manager was listening to the evolution of your life and what you have finally characterized as the important part of your life, and it's really good. So I urge people to watch this. So you've been listening to Shep Gordon, a legendary manager, a legendary a music business legend behind the scenes. Most people don't know. And I will just say this, Shep, when people talk to me about celebrity and I go, I'm not really famous, I realize how famous I truly am. I'm famous enough to get into a restaurant, and I'm famous enough to get a good doctor if I need one. You know what I mean? Oh, that guy from Twisted Sister, he needs a gallbladder operation. Yeah, move him up a little bit.
And that's important.
You know, and I'll use that when I have to. But no, it's good that you use the power that you have for the good things that you do. So kudos to you for that, and thank you for being on the JJ French Connection this week. So everyone, listen to Supermensch if you get a chance, or watch Supermensch, and you'll love it. You'll get to know Shep a little bit better. And Shep, I hope to see you in the future.
Yeah, same here. Aloha, everybody. Stay safe.